Hello again. So I want to share with you today few strategies from John O'Donohue, basically what to do after a destructive encounter, in particular when you feel like you've been misunderstood. And let's say there's not a lot of resolution that you can obtain in said scenario. Thanks for tuning in. So I will draw from one of my own experiences 4 or 5 years ago. I had a situation where basically had a blow up with someone that my perception was that they understood and got me on some significant levels, core levels that seemed important. And so that likely contributed to the difficulty that I had in healing from the situation, because there was this perception that, okay, they get it, and then in the blow up, I came to the realization that they didn't get it, and so how to resolve that. And in my case, it was complicated further by the fact that communication ended at that point, largely on that was their choice, not mine. So I came across the words of John O'Donohue, who I still find these words quite healing. So I will share them with you. The title of this, it's a blessing from one of his books of blessings, called After a Destructive Encounter. And this is the second half of said writing. Withdraw for a while into your own tranquility. Loosen from your heart the new fester. Free yourself of the wounded gaze that is not yet able to see you. Recognize your responsibility for the past. Don't allow your sense of yourself to wilt. Draw deep from your own dignity. Temper your expectation to the other's limits and take your time carefully, learning that there is a time for everything, and for healing too, but that now is not that time yet. Insight. Withdraw for a while into your own tranquility. It's often the case that when there's a misunderstanding, when there's miscommunication, that one of the things we most need is perspective. You get perspective when you back away and start to look at the whole situation rather than just through our tunnel vision. So that's piece one, withdraw. But the specific place you withdraw to would be into a place of your own tranquility. You don't go into what the other person did in terms of why you should blame them. That's our human tendency. Well, they did X, Y, and Z, and so it's like we withdraw so that we can get behind the rock, so that we can get the bow and arrow and shoot the arrow at them from behind the rock, as opposed to withdrawing to go into a space of tranquility and peace so that we can look at what happened through that lens and really from a core space, from a core solid space that is grounded in ourselves, in our unique capacities and tools. So I love that. I think that's on, what's the term now? On fleek? Is that? My kids tell me that's a term. So that's piece one. Loosen from your heart the new fester. So the tendency can be, as I just alluded to fester, for this whole thing to fester, and you either get focused on what they did wrong, because then we can push the responsibility outside ourselves. We can blame them. Obviously, they missed me. How could they do that? How could they not get how great I am? Blah, 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 whatever it is, right? Defense mechanisms where we get to push the blame elsewhere. So that's one tendency. But the other tendency is you can go the other way. You can go into a space where you over-own the responsibility in said scenario, and you take all the responsibility, and then that festers into, wow, I totally effed up. This whole situation is my fault. And you go into kind of a self-destructive, despairing, dark space where the universe not being right is your fault too. That is the festering on either end. So you want to loosen from your heart the new fester. And then he says, free yourself of the wounded gaze that is not yet able to see you. So we have to recognize that anytime we're interacting with anybody on the planet, that other person has a wounded gaze through which they see us, right? Their trauma is their lens that they look through. The psychologists call this projection, because you project onto other people your junk, unless you are hyper aware of it. Well, even still, you still might, even when you're hyper aware of it. So the wounded gaze, part of that is they're not able to see you because of that. But the other side of that is that we also have a wounded gaze in looking at that other person, looking at the situation, looking at ourselves, right? The fact that we have certain tendencies, let's say, from whatever trauma, in my case, in my experience, the tendency for me is to go down a self-reproach, self-loathing, despair kind of place, and to allow, as he says, he says, recognize your responsibility for the past, but don't allow your sense of yourself to wilt, right? You take responsibility, but don't own the whole kibosh, right? It's an interaction. There's only so much of it that you control personally. And again, there's that trauma lens, the trauma lens of this other person and their experiences in life and their traumas that inform the way they see you, but your trauma as well. And so that can lead to allowing a sense of yourself to wilt, especially if the situation is that the traumas, if they're similar enough, if they're on the same wavelength, so to speak, that can allow, can be energetically extremely hard to hold, right? The whole thing can just blow up, partly because of the similarity of the trauma, right? Same wavelength, okay, and then the two things explode. The concept in physics, I'm not going to do justice to this, but I will try, because not so good in physics, just going to own that. There was too much math involved. I'm also not good in math. But in physics, there's this concept of resonance, where you have waves and especially with sound waves. And you can have sound waves, and if the sound waves are on the same wavelength, literally, or close, the same frequency, as other things, then it can cause an energy that is destructive. Example, the classic example that is raised in physics class, at least, is of the bridge. I can't remember the name of the bridge. I want to say it was on the West Coast somewhere. And they built this bridge, and the frequency was the same as the winds that would blow through this area. And the bridge actually fell as a result of these two things being on the same wavelength. Okay, those of you that are physicists out there, pardon my peasant's description of your classic example that I should remember from physics class, which was a while ago. And anyway, but that same concept, I think, extends to, it can be the kind of interaction that can happen in traumatic scenarios. So if you have resonance, same kind of idea, resonance of traumas that are similar, then you can bring the whole freaking bridge down. You weren't trying to do that. So that it makes sense. Anyways, back to healing and John O'Donohue, because this was all about helping. Yeah, so you recognize your responsibility for the past. You don't allow your sense of yourself to wilt, because you can go there, right? I can go there. And like I said, if the trauma of this other person is on the same wavelength, then the potential to go there is even more, and then the bridge falls down. Draw deep from your own dignity. Temper your expectation to the other's limits, and take your time carefully, learning that there is a time for everything. Right? So giving grace and patience to the process of healing itself, but that now is not that time yet. I love his use of the word yet twice in here, where there's hope that resolution can occur in us, in the situation, in our own healing journey, and that is the point. So you resolve these kinds of things, you work with them by trying to complete the circle really in yourself. It's somewhat independent of the other person, because that's all you can control. You cannot control what somebody else chooses to do. And when your healing process feels like it's entangled up in their healing process, then this is one, two, or three, a few strategies as to how to go about doing that. Right? You're going to temper your expectations to the other's limits. You're not going to create, because it's possible to create the billboard, the changing advertising billboard that's out there that's kind of delusional, where you go, well, if they would just say they were sorry, if they would just write me a check for $1 million, or whatever. These are hypothetical situations, ways, right? Delusions that we can create. But sometimes we do that in the healing process in terms of expecting or wanting someone to resolve the situation by doing X. But then if they do X, then that turns into Y, and then Y turns into Z. And so it's not really a solution. The solution is to resolve the situation in yourself. That ultimately is how you heal. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was useful. Adieu.